So I do want to start off just to kind of let people in South Africa know again. There are a lot of people here who follow you and know you, but just for those who don't, kind of start with all that stuff, and then we'll get into the interview and throw them some red meat about our views that we both share and all that stuff. So we'll get into
sounds
it.
good.
Nice to see you, and thank you for making the time.
No doubt. You're welcome.
All right. Well, this is a day I've been waiting for a little while. I really like this guy. I have so much to say to him. He says so many things that I love listening to, and he is a rapper. He is a podcaster. He's a really, really impressive human being. Pretty much one of the most independent thinkers I've found on the internet. Public speaker. He's a creative entrepreneur. He's got nearly 2 million followers on his social media accounts. He was born in England, raised in Saudi Arabia. He's a graduate of Oxford University. Now, if that doesn't sound like enough, he just recently interviewed Joe Rogan, Elon Musk, Tucker Carlson, Piers Morgan. He's got a long list of people that he's spoken to. And it's a great pleasure to have Zuby on the show today. So first of all, man, welcome back to South Africa, even if it is figuratively or virtually. It's really good to see you. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. Doing very well as always, and happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. For those people who don't know you very well, before you and I start talking about all the things that we agree and disagree on, tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, it's pretty fascinating to meet someone from Saudi, because most Saudi Arabians, most people in Saudi Arabia are there for a very short time. And only now is that kingdom really opening up. And I think it's a fascinating part of your backstory that's where you're from. But tell us a little bit about all of that.
Yeah, sure thing. Well, I wouldn't say that I'm from Saudi Arabia. That would suggest that I'm a citizen. I'm not a national of Saudi Arabia. I am, by birth, I am British and Nigerian. Both of my parents are originally from Nigeria.
Right.
Oh, sorry. I'm dealing with some echo.
Oh, was there echo? Well, there was an echo before. Let me just see if there's something wrong here. Hang on.
Yeah.
Is that better? 1 2 1 2 1. Is that better?
1 2 1 2. Yes, that's better now.
All right. Cool. Sorted.
Okay.
So
sorry. Just take that from the top.
Yeah, start that again with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, sure. So I wouldn't say that I'm from Saudi Arabia because I'm not a citizen. I'm not a national of Saudi Arabia. I was actually born in the UK to Nigerian parents. Both of my parents are originally from Nigeria, and I was born in England. When I was a baby, about 1 year old, my whole family moved to Saudi Arabia. My dad's a medical doctor, and he got an opportunity to work over there. So myself, my parents, and my 4 older siblings all went out over there, and I ended up living there for a grand total of 20 years. I was in school there from kindergarten up until 5th grade. So I guess from around age 4 or 5 until age 11. And then at age 11, I went to boarding school in the UK. So I was in boarding school in England for 5 years. So no, not 5 years, 7 years in total. So going back and forth between both countries, from Saudi Arabia to the UK multiple times a year. And after I was finished school, I did very well in school. I got top grades in every subject. I got into Oxford University. I went there, studied computer science, and that's also where I started my music career. I released my very first album when I was in my 2nd year of university. And I graduated at the age of 20, got my degree, and I took a year out, did my music full time for 1 year before moving to London and joining the corporate world. So I actually worked as a management consultant for a few years while juggling my music career on the side. And then in late 2011, I took the big plunge and decided to quit my job, leave the corporate world, and go into my music full time. So from 2011 up until now, I have been an independent musician full time and a creative entrepreneur. I now also have written a couple of books. I host a successful podcast and feature on a lot of other people's. I do public speaking around the world, and I also coach people as well.
No, it's amazing. I mean, you're a real underachiever, huh? I mean, it's not as if you've done nearly enough. What if this idea? What about this idea of identity? Because when you've grown up in a place like Saudi Arabia, you have Nigerian ancestry. You grew up in the UK, went to school there as well. you can really draw on all of those things. So what do you make of people who put identity at the center of everything?
That's a good question. It's an interesting one. I mean, it's not the way that I was raised, and maybe some of my views are due to the fact that I've always been very secure in my identity. Even though I'm not from a single place, if somebody asks me where I'm from or where's my home country or my hometown, there isn't a simple answer to that. I mean, it's a combination of all the different things that I mentioned. But with that said, I've always had a very secure identity. I've always been very confident in who I am. And that's just grown over the course of time. I think my parents have done a fantastic job, and I'm blessed to be from a very solid and stable family and a big family as well. So I've always had my identity within that. I've always been very clear on who I am. I had certain values, principles, morals, and ethics instilled in me from a very young age. And even aside from that, over the course of the last 18 years, as I said, I mean, I've been forging out my own path now for half of my life. You know, the majority of my adult life, I've been self-employed, and I've been very clear on what my mission and my purpose is. And that hasn't really deviated since the age of 18. So when it comes to identity, I'm very clear on who I am and what I'm about. And so I don't feel any need to, how would I say, sort of make up for it or compensate or try to latch onto things that are not really, let's say, achievements or things that I haven't worked for and things that aren't valued to find my identity in, let alone to judge other people by those things and get caught up in, you know, the identity politics and all of that stuff. To me, I get why people do it, and I understand that it's human to some degree, but I also think it's foolish, and I think it's unhelpful, both currently, and it's certainly been more than unhelpful historically. So I don't really get caught up in those games. I mean, if people want my views or would like to talk about those things, I'm happy to talk about them. I don't shy away from them. But it's interesting, I guess, as a human psychological phenomenon. But those issues of identity and identity politics, I think it's a major distraction from many other things that we should be working on and focusing on as individuals and collectively.
Yeah, I think the two things I just want to pick up in there that I think are fascinating. And first of all, I mean, the real privilege in life is family, right? And a family that loves you and a place you could feel secure and grow up in,
Mhm.
and where you can be yourself and develop your personality and develop all those things that make us the individuals that we are, and make us interesting, not only to the world and to other people, but to posterity, hopefully, if we're able to make that kind of a difference. And the other thing, because people talk about privilege, you know, they say there's you know, white privilege, there's pretty privilege, there are all these different privileges. I think the only one that matters is probably family. And I want to hear if you agree with me or not. But the other thing is this idea of identity and belonging to something, whether it's a community, whether it's a race, whether it's a religion, whether it's a culture. I think that probably matters most to people when they feel left out, when they feel alone, when they feel unmoored. And when you've got something to moor yourself to, I suppose identity kind of becomes less important. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd agree with that to a degree. I mean, look, we can't get away from identity because we all have one, and we all should have one. And we, you know, whether or not you want to be assigned to certain groups and categories, we are all by dint of birth members of various groups and categories, right? We are all born with a nationality. We're born into a specific family. We're born of a certain race and or ethnicity. We're born to a family that speaks a certain language, has certain traditions, most likely practices some type of religion, and then we're surrounded by people who may be similar or dissimilar from that. So you can't really run away from identity, and I don't think doing so is helpful. But at the same time, I think it's much better to, both with yourself and with other people, it doesn't make sense to judge people's character or assume their experiences or their advantages or disadvantages or their capabilities or their heart or their intentions, anything like that, based off of these immutable characteristics, which, as we both know, you're just born into, right? These are just a matter of circumstance. right? My skin color is not some type of achievement. I didn't work for it. It doesn't tell people very much about me beyond the land that my ancestors may have descended from. It's just my DNA. I would much rather, I mean, the things that I personally take pride in are things that I have done or things that I've achieved or the content of my character, certain things that I've created. I'm a creative individual. I'm proud of my albums. I'm proud of the books that I've written. I'm proud of the man that I'm growing into and I'm becoming.
You're gonna start sounding like Martin Luther King, and the left don't like him. You used to think he was a hero once, huh?
I don't know. I mean, when you even say the left, I mean, I don't even know exactly what that means. I mean, when we even use terms like the left and the right, I mean, it's such a broad, they're such broad categories. When someone says the right, I mean, I don't know. Are they talking about me? Are they talking about the politicians? Are they, I don't really know. But yeah, look, I was just raised to very basic stuff, right? You know, treat people well, treat people as you would like to be treated. Don't unfairly judge people, don't make assumptions and have prejudices and biases based on what someone looks like or, you know, these sort of characteristics. It's very obvious stuff, but I think it's strange how, despite it being so obvious, it's something that human beings have clearly struggled with for millennia. You would hope that by 2024, we'd be completely over that kind of identitarian stuff. And I do think that for the most part, people are. I do think for the most part people are. And I think that there are, I know that there are bad actors that are out there who like to stir the pot and find every fault line that exists within humanity and use that for their political or financial gain or their power gain. And I think the best way to win the battle is to just not play the game.
Okay, but you sound so reasonable. So how is it that someone who sounds as reasonable as you, who believes in things that are like universally good and acceptable, you would think. How is it that someone like you gets so much like anger and uproar going every time you tweet anything? I mean, I've been following you on social media for a couple of years now. I think we've known each other online for what, probably close to 10 years. And it just seems to me that, you know, the more people get on the internet, the more find a reason to fight with everybody, and especially to fight with you. I don't know what you're doing. I mean, it seems to me like it's just a lightning rod.
Yeah, well, I've been on the internet and social media for wow, it's crazy to say, at least over 20 years at this point. And so you learn a lot about humanity doing this. I've had quite literally, you know, interactions with millions of people across the entire world. And I think the first thing to recognize is that the love massively outweighs the hate and the negativity. For every negative comment I have, or every, you know, hater or troll, there are somewhere in the region of 100 people. You know, I'd say it's about 100 to 1 positive to negative ratio. Now, the way that most people are wired, we tend to be more sensitive to the negative because we're sensitive to anything that could be deemed as a threat. But I'll tell you, in the real world, whether I'm in the UK or the USA or South Africa or UAE or Nigeria or Mexico or anywhere in the world, it's all love. Always, always, always positive interactions. And I think it's important to recognize, particularly for, you know, online people such as ourselves, people who speak to an audience every day and every week, it's important to remember that there are just a lot of people out there in the world who are angry. So when you get an angry comment, or when someone is nasty, or when someone has this totally irrational response to something that's very benign, it actually has nothing to do with you. It has to do with them. There are, as we speak right now, Gareth, there are millions of people around the world who are scrolling their phone looking for something to be angry at, right? They're doom scrolling. They're already mad. They're already upset, and they're just on X or on Instagram or on Facebook, and they're trying to find something to react to. And sometimes that's you. Sometimes that's your face that pops up, and you giving a hot take or your opinion, or just even just sharing something that you might be doing, and they just unleash on that keyboard because they find it cathartic. And it's important to not take it personally, because you just think it's like this. Firstly, I don't even know who this person is. This could be a child for all I know, because it's normally people who are hiding behind a fake name, and, you know, they've got an anonymous display picture. And it makes no sense to take that to heart. And I think this is where a lot of people get this is where people's mental health can really start getting impacted negatively by the internet, because I don't think our brains are so good at separating reality from separating from this virtual world. But having been in it for a long time, as I'm sure you know yourself, you grow a tough skin. You learn to not care about most people's opinions. In all honesty, you learn to be quite judicious. So you learn that not everyone's opinion is created equally. Now, if my friends and my family start saying, "Hey, Zuby, like, you're out of order, you're doing this thing wrong," or whatever, people who know me, love me, care about me, I will definitely take heed of that. I'll be like, all right, if the people who know me and love me are saying I'm messing up, I'm probably messing up. If it's, super dog 125983 on Twitter with 3 followers and a bunch of then they could say the most horrible thing to me and I might be like, oh, that's a bit weird, but immediately I carry on if I even notice it.
So some of the things that I noticed that you're talking about lately, I find this quite interesting because I do think, like the Enlightenment gave way to the Romantics. You kind of have this idea that everything is cyclical. And we went through, I'm sure you did too. I think you're a little bit younger than me, but we're almost in the same generation. I'm sure you went through that stage where the heroes, the intellectual heroes of the world were like atheists, like Richard Dawkins, and I saw Daniel Dennett died just the other day. He was one of them. Christopher Hitchens. Those are the sort of people who were outspoken, individual, independent thinkers, the kind of people I think we grew up looking up to. And it seems to me it's swinging the other way around. I've even realized some of your tweets are, indicative of a deep spiritual belief, very strong feelings about things like religion, very strong feelings about things like health, fitness, your body is a temple, that kind of thing. And those are ideas which last raised their heads some time ago. There was this kind of down on that stuff for a short while, and now it's on the up again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, you referred to some names from the sort of new atheist movement. I think you named 3 out of the 4 so-called what do they call them, though? The 4 horsemen of new atheism, or something.
I think the only one I left out was Sam Harris.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as a lifelong Christian and believer in God, I have never been I've never been a fan of these people. They've never been heroes to me, let me say. Intellectually, obviously, these are all intelligent and intellectual people. And I think in a strange way, it might sound strange for me saying this as a person of faith, but as someone who's both a person of faith and someone who's a critical thinker and who is also an advocate for freedom of speech, I do think it's important that we are allowed to question and challenge and have discussions about everything. And that includes my own religion, that includes my own beliefs, that includes traditions and cultures and values that I hold on to. So I'm very much of the opinion that, okay, I'm not a fan of these arguments, and obviously that's not my worldview. But at the same time, we should be able to have intellectual debates, and there should be a marketplace of ideas and belief systems. I think one thing that I can say is I don't think that when was that movement really popular? I guess it was maybe from the late 90s, perhaps to the late 2000s, going into maybe the early 2010s. Yeah. And I think that the truth is that I don't think that experiment played out the way that perhaps they thought it would. So I think if you go back to the year, I don't know, 1998 or the year 2005, I think that a lot of people, whether they are agnostic or atheistic or even anti-theistic in the case of some of these people, I think they thought because, well, I think that I think this is their thinking, right? I'm going to kind of speak in a generalized term in the way I think they think, is that, okay, I am a rational, intellectual, smart, moral, and ethical human being, and I feel like I have a strong moral compass, which is derived from my evolution or from wherever else I may think it comes from, even if it's just eternal. Right. And therefore, if we can just, this is where I think what anti-theism is rooted in. If we can just get everybody, if we can just root all religion and belief in the supernatural and superstition and all of this stuff that's not material and scientifically provable and totally logical and rational, if we can just get everyone away from that, then what we're going to be left with is more people, millions, billions of people who are just totally logical and rational and kind and inclusive and friendly and tolerant. And, you know, we can just advance as a species if we can get away from all of that old stuff, all of those old books and beliefs and so on. And of course, I have a bias in saying this because I'm a person of faith. But I think I know that even a lot of people who don't share my religious beliefs, I've had many conversations with atheists, both offline and online, who are like, this doesn't seem to be going that well. We're not really noticing people becoming more rational and more kind and more tolerant.
I mean, it's also true, and you can argue quite strongly that what has happened is that the people who've given up on religion, a great many of them, I would say by far a majority of them, have replaced that with something else, a political association, an ideology. They've taken up, I don't know, transgenderism or heaven knows what else. I would like to know if you think that, not having a source of morality that may be spiritual or religious leads you down paths that take you to other places where people proffer morality to you, and that it may be a more dangerous decision long term because your need, there's a God-shaped hole maybe in everybody, and all of these things purport to fill that hole.
Yes. Well, I have a pretty simple hypothesis on human beings. I'm not a psychologist, so I can't back this all up with studies. But I don't even think this is really a hypothesis. I think it's just a fact that human beings are a religious species, right? Homo sapiens, we are a religious species. I mean, last time I checked, something like 90% of people around the entire world right now in 2024 believe in God or some type of supernatural higher power. I've actually heard that even children have a natural inclination, even if not raised in that way, that children, even from a very young age, believe that in some type of God. And so this has always been the case. So I think when you talk about that sort of substitution hypothesis, I think that is simply the case for most people. Because look, at a minimum, there are certain things that people want and need. Of course, we've got there's the sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There's the basic things we need to just survive: food, water, shelter, warmth, things like that. But then once we've got our material needs met, especially as you get into adulthood, what are the things that people search for? Well, firstly, what's the meaning of all this? Why am I alive? Why am I here? What is my purpose? What is my meaning? People, of course, search for community.
Slow down the podcast. We're already getting to the most important questions in the whole universe. So this is what happens when I talk to someone like you.
Well, people want purpose. People want meaning. People need community. People need guidance. People need some type of orientation and direction of morality, of ethics, of what to do, what not to do. People need some type of fulfillment. And people are going to look for that somewhere. It doesn't have to come from religion. It can come from political ideologies. It can come from belief systems and isms and schisms, whether that's feminism or it's communism or it's veganism or it's wokeism or it's being a social justice warrior. People are going to try to find that somewhere. I think there's probably a very, very small percentage of people who genuinely don't sort of need that and who can be, let's say, totally atheistic and secular with no form of any of that. There's probably like a very small minority of people who can genuinely do that, but it's certainly not the most people. It's certainly not most people. And so go ahead.
I'm sorry, I've come to understand that a little bit better in time. I mean, I used to be one of those people. I was always very strident about how I didn't believe. And the more I look back on history, which I used to quote as a good reason for people to stay away from religion, and you think about what happened in the 20th century, and you think about how those people who were purported atheists, uh, they really wreaked havoc on humanity. And of course, they might not have had a spiritual scaffolding. They might not have belonged to one of the three great monotheisms or any of the religions, mind you, but their religions were those politics of the day, whether it was fascism or communism or whatever else it was. And it brought them to do far, far worse things than some of the religious people of their time were doing. I wouldn't absent any kind of blame from the annals of history for religion, but I would say, if you're going to choose something to live by, let it at least be something which is demonstrably morally good. And I think, you're a Christian, Judaism, Islam, in many broad strokes, these so they've earned their place. They've kind of proven themselves over thousands, if not hundreds of years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, let's not even we don't even need to get caught up in theology on a deep level, but I think we can ask a pretty simple question, which is, if everyone tried to be more like Jesus Christ and tried to live according to his teachings, how would we be doing as a society, right? If everyone genuinely just strived for that, if it was like, all right, day by day, in my workplace, with my family, with my friends, amongst strangers, I'm going to do my best to be Christ-like. Even if we just went with that, I mean, we'd be doing pretty well. I think even the most hardline atheist would have to say, oh yeah, actually, that in fact maybe they themselves are already doing that. Maybe they're not attributing it to that same thing. Maybe that's not how they'd speak about it. But that is essentially what they're striving for, right? When we even say a good person, I hear a lot of people say, you don't need to believe in God or you don't need to be religious to be a good person. Yeah. Obviously, that's true. And it's obviously true that claiming to believe in God or being religious doesn't make you a good person. In fact, Jesus himself was pretty clear on that with, the Pharisees and the way certain people were behaving, right? Certain parables, the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? All these so-called religious people. There's this person who gets beaten and robbed and is lying there in the street needing help. And all these people who are supposed to be religious, who are supposed to be followers of God, right? They just step aside and pass by this man who is suffering and dying in the street. And then someone who's supposed to be from a sort of warring tribe, an enemy tribe, Samaria, he comes and helps the person. And then the question is, well, who's the one who was this neighbor and the person who showed him pity? So I think oftentimes we get so caught up in the, when I say we here, I'm actually talking about religious people, and I can talk about Christians specifically. I think sometimes we get so wrapped up. Theology is important, don't get me wrong. But I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in theology and the battle between the denominations, right? The Catholics versus the Protestants versus the Orthodox versus the people get so wrapped up in the, well, which is the better church, who's the better Christian, and so on. And when people get locked into that tribal mentality, as we've already alluded to, that's when bad things happen. So even when people are like, oh, religion causes wars, or religion is a source of violence, or this or this or this, firstly, I don't think that's really true. I think that's blaming what imperfect and sinful human beings do on a religion. Because as I said, if you are following the example of Christ, and then you're going out and you're hurting or raping or murdering or robbing people, you're no matter whose name you say you're doing it in, you are violating multiple of the commands very egregiously, right? I mean, if someone goes and says, if someone goes out and kills people and said, oh, I'm doing this in the name of God, it's like, I don't think God is happy with you, right? You're violating the commands of your religion. In fact, you're violating, like, the thou shalt not kill is the most basic and fundamental commandment. Yeah. So if you're going out there and killing, then but Man,
You're
this is a deep
that
conversation.
person.
I just think, look, I also just think, last point I'll just make on this is also, look, in Christianity, one of the core beliefs is that human beings are inherently sinful.
Yeah.
People are inherently sinful, the fall of man. And it's not just that we're sinful, but the whole idea is that we're so sinful and we're so messed up that we can't even find salvation. We can't even get salvation on our own, right? Like, we deserve to die for our sins.
Right.
But because of Jesus Christ, who was the ultimate sacrifice, we don't have to. So humanity is just a jacked up species. Like, we're messed up. We have all sorts of proclivities. Even the most good and righteous person has messed up thoughts in their head from time to time, right? We all get angry. We all feel lust sometimes when we shouldn't.
Mm.
We've all had times where, you know, we've said something or we're even about to say something which is not good and is not wholesome and which is going to hurt another person. We all have these proclivities. And I think that, you know, I'd say that what makes someone good is, you know, largely acknowledging their capacity to do bad and then refraining from doing it consistently. I don't think a good person is just someone who's totally harmless or totally naive. I think it's, you know, you recognize, yeah, like, that evil potential is within me and I choose not to act on it.
Let me ask you again, you know, some more personal stuff, because what is the point of building yourself up, whether it's intellectually, spiritually, physically, if it isn't to have kids, to start your own family?
Mm.
You know, I think there are a lot of people who kind of think, well, a material life, a life where you look for excitement, money, maybe business success, maybe you are looking for fame, whatever it is people look for. Do you think that those are enough? Or do you think that it's important that you actually bring children into the world? I mean, how are your feelings in that sphere? And are you in a like a stable relationship? Are you thinking about kids? Have you got kids already? I don't know any of this about you.
Yeah, no problem at all, man. I don't have children yet. I am in a stable relationship, and I very much look forward to being married in the future and having
Okay.
children in the future. As I said, I'm from a big family myself. I'm one of 5. My dad is one of 11. My mom is one of 7. And
Wow.
so I have over 50 first cousins, 10 nieces and nephews, and yes, I'm very much of the inclination of wanting to pass on my genetics and raise other human beings. And look, I think a lot of people, both young men and women, particularly, let's say, in their late teens or at some point in their 20s, I think most people in the modern West flirt with the idea of being forever single and childless. I know that I did, not for a long time, but I had that moment of like, oh, maybe it would be cool to just be like an eternal bachelor and just, you know, never have. And then, do you know what snapped me totally out of that thinking? It wasn't even faith. It was just thinking, okay, I am the result of an unbroken chain of reproduction going back until like the beginning of the beginning.
Hmm.
So am I going to be the person who's just like, meh, the buck stops here. It's a wrap.
You're just gonna like selfishly decide it's all done. Okay, that's enough.
Yeah, it's all done. It ends with me, guys. That's it. No more. Right. You know, just an empty branch on that family tree. And even just thinking of that like mortified me and just being like, no, no, no. And look, of course, not everyone is even capable of having children, sadly, and not everyone has the inclination. But again, as far as I know, I think over 90% of people, both men and women in the world, expressly say that they would like to have children. And that number shouldn't really be surprising, because if we didn't have that urgent inclination, then our species wouldn't last very long. We'd be like panda bears. And so, yeah, for me personally, I don't yet have kids, but I certainly am going to in the future, and I'm excited about it. I look forward to it. And I'm also, look, I'd go even further, and I would say that, look, with the way our societies are going, I would actively encourage and support anyone who's got the potential to raise good children, in particular, should have children, and ideally, if they can afford it, a lot of them. I think it's a massive shame that so many smart, capable, decent people are opting not to. That doesn't really bode very well
Why do
for
you
our
think that
species
is?
in the
I
long
mean,
run.
why do you think that is? Because you just recently interviewed Elon, and I know he very much agrees with you on this front.
Mm,
It is his point of view that we are actually facing a population crisis, not a population explosion. That there are
yeah.
many countries where they've got inverse birth rates, and he says the future of humanity is not secure unless people are having children. And he has a whole little tribe of his own. So
Yeah.
he agrees with you. Why do you think it is people are choosing the opposite?
Yeah. Shout out to Elon. I mean, can you imagine if we lost Elon's genetics? That would be that would be terrible. Like, it's good that Elon Musk has 9 children, because I mean, you don't want to lose those genetics. I'm sure at least one of those 9 has got to go on and do something incredible. But why do I think this is? I mean, Gareth, it's many things, many. It's multifaceted. It's not a single thing. There are economic reasons, financial reasons, religious reasons, familial reasons. In some people's brains, environmental reasons. Although that's not, I don't think that's a valid one. Um, Educational reasons. People, optionality is a factor. Birth control is a factor. There are a lot of reasons why people, social media and technology is a factor, because people
Yeah,
influence each other. I'd say
right.
another big factor, which people often don't talk about, is the sort of mimetic aspect of it. So in many large cities, in particular in the West, you don't see a lot of children and a lot of babies. And seeing children and babies and families makes you want that. If you're in a place, I don't know, if you're in New York City, or you're in certain parts of London, or
Yeah.
you're in I don't know, Los Angeles. I travel a lot, and I notice there's places where I feel like I barely see children, and I barely see families, and I certainly don't see babies. And if there are babies, they're not really they're sort of viewed a bit as a nuisance. And then if I think about where I am right now I'm in Dubai. Dubai is full of kids. Dubai is like, I can step outside my apartment and there's just kids running around everywhere. There's babies and strollers. You go to a restaurant, there's like the car park for the cars, and then there's the park for the strollers. And there's just all these strollers, and they're just out there, and you go in and there's just kids running around. So even just being here makes me more, I'm already pro family, and I already want to and plan to have children. But it makes me, it just shows me, oh wow, like this is cool. This is cool.
Yeah.
And I think that, I mean, look, you see, I think, and I'm speaking as a man, I think this is even perhaps more true with women. Um, I think when women hold babies, whether it's a friend's baby or it's their sister's baby, or they see a random baby and it makes them broody, for lack of a for lack of a better term, right? It's just like, oh wow, this is cool. And babies are just cute, and children are fun. And I think when you don't see it and you're not surrounded by it,
Yeah.
it's I think people forget, or perhaps they never know to begin with, what that type of joy can be. And it just becomes like, oh my gosh, they're expensive and it's a burden. And look, I'll tell you what I think happens is, I think the like we have different aspects of our brain, right? We have something that's just very, we have the sort of lizard brain, which is very instinctual and just sort of biologically hardwired, and that type
Survival.
of drive. And then we have the very cerebral part. So we're here doing this podcast, right? We're in cerebral mode right now. And I think that when people are outside of those environments, or they've never seen it, or even more so when they have seen it, it's been a kind of toxic or destructive situation. Maybe that was the family they themselves came from. I think people get caught up in the cerebral aspect. So when you even talk about children or family, they start calculating, oh my gosh, how much is this going to cost? How much sleep am I going to lose? What about my job? What about my career? What about vacation? What about this? What about that? These are all valid concerns in a way. But I think that the cerebral overrides the instinctual biological imperative. in these cases. And so I think there's a mimetic aspect, which is the fewer people have children and the fewer families you see, then that also impacts the other people around in that area or community to also be like, you know, okay, I'm going to do the same. I mean, people generally do what the people around them are doing, for better or for worse. So I think that's a factor that's not often spoken about. I think there's a lot of talk about the economic reasons and how hard it is to find, you know, a good man or a good woman, or the problems with marriage and all of these other things, how hard it is to buy a home. I think these things are spoken about a lot, but I think that there's a much more sort of simple and mimetic aspect to it that we don't discuss very often.
So what do you do to kind of get your head out of that cerebral space? Because as much as we want to be in there, and you and I make a living, I think, out of doing that. You certainly are creative in the musical sense, where I'm not. I'm jealous of that. I think it's amazing, and I've heard your stuff, and I think it's tremendous. But
Thank
you
you.
know, you sometimes, well, it's a pleasure. You sometimes have to like get out of that space, especially if you're on the internet a long time, and if you're dealing with really smart people. You've interviewed some of these smart people. I'll ask you about those in a second. What do you do to clear your mind, to have fun? You go out into nature? What sort of stuff do you do?
Do you mean me personally?
Yeah, you.
Sure. I exist in the real world. As much as I do spend a lot of time online and on social media, I spend far much more time off of it. I've taken every Sunday off for the past 4 or 5 years. So on Sundays, I don't use social media at all. So I get a sort of weekly reset. I'll have 6 days on, 1 day completely off. And even on the days that I'm using it, firstly, I try to be quite intentional with my usage. I try to be more in production mode than in just pure consumption mode. I avoid doom scrolling. I try to stay busy, but I'm blessed to have, you know, I'm blessed to have a great family who I'm very close to. I have a lot of friends all over the world. So no matter what country or city I'm in, I'm always meeting up with people. I have a girlfriend whom I love, and I spend time with her, even when it's long distance. You know, I talk to people, and I go for a lot of walks. Obviously, I train a lot. I just exist in the real world, and I find that just that helps to keep you grounded. There's a real danger in spending too much time just staring at screens and consuming and consuming and consuming, especially with no break, because it gives you a warped reality of the world. And it definitely has a psychological impact. I mean, we're the same. We've had this technology of smartphones and social media combined for under 20 years, and we're not really wired for it. It has a lot of massive benefits, and people like yourself and myself and many others are able to use it as a massive net positive. We wouldn't be able to do what we're doing right now, and people wouldn't be able to tune in if it were not for this technology. But it's a matter of balance. It's a matter of balance. And I think everyone is aware of that and everyone knows it. But because of the addictive nature, and I guess because of people's willpower, they struggle to step away from it. It's not different to how, look, even you don't need to be a nutritional expert or a fitness expert to know that it's good to exercise and it's good to drink a lot of water. And most people know that a chicken salad is healthier than a cheeseburger and fries, right? Most people somewhat have an idea of what a healthy, nutritious diet looks like. They might not know all the ins and outs and all the science, but people know the basics. But it's difficult. It's difficult. People get addicted to things. People prioritize. Look, the thing is, in most things, in virtually any human endeavor, if you give people an easy option and a hard option, most people will take the easy option. People typically take the path of least resistance. And that probably made sense for most of human history, because just survival itself was very difficult. So why would you then want to go out and, you know, I'd imagine that. Yeah, exactly. Right. When food. Yeah. If you went back to a time when food was scarce and there were famines and there were wars and whatever, right? Say you're out working in the field for 6 or 7 hours a day, or you're hunting or you're gathering or whatever. You're not then going to then go and waste calories doing press ups and lifting heavy rocks and, you know, going for a jog for no reason. That would be insane, right? Calories were not abundant. But now we live in the opposite time where calories are abundant. A lot of us, I don't know the number, but I'd imagine most people in developed countries, yeah, no, definitely the majority of people make a living sitting down, right? Most people are sitting down for most of the day, probably looking at a screen, probably eating while they're looking at the screen. And so now we have to put in the effort to expend those excess calories.
Fat and useless.
Exactly. So there's been this recent inversion. So I think it's the same with the technology, right? We've all got smartphones now. We all have various screens. Most of us have social media accounts. I think there's 4 billion people on social media now. And I'm far from a Luddite. I think people should embrace these technologies, but I think that they should embrace them for good. If you're finding that it's hurting your mental health, if you find that you're feeling angry or depressed or anxious or whatever throughout the day, or you've got massive FOMO and you just checked Twitter, but then you're pulling your phone out again 2 minutes later to check it again.
Yeah.
I think it's important to just catch yourself in those moments. Right. I'm not holier than thou. I have these moments. I think it's important to just check that and be like, wait, hang on. I don't need to do that.
So let me ask you a couple of things, because I know you and I could talk for hours, and I will one day. You've been in South Africa before, and you've met somebody who I work with now, a guy called Warwick Stock.
Yeah, great dude.
Yeah, he sends his regards, by the way.
Awesome.
But you've been here. Do you plan to come back to South Africa? What did you pick up in the short time that you spent here last time?
Yeah, so I went to South Africa twice last year. My first time in February, and then I went there again in November. And firstly, I had a great time. I met a lot of wonderful people, and it was an honor to be invited to speak. And it was cool. It's always cool when you're in a city or in a country that you've never been to before, and there are people who know you, and there are people who like you and appreciate what I'm doing. I mean, both in Johannesburg and Cape Town, I got stopped multiple times, you know, sometimes just, you know, in a shopping mall or in the street or whatever, by people who had seen my videos on YouTube, or they follow me on X or whatever it is. I actually did a meetup in Cape Town where I met with several dozens of my fans and followers. And so that was beautiful. It's a beautiful country as well. I mean, geographically, Cape Town in particular, very, very beautiful city, wonderful natural scenery. People I generally met were amiable, met lots of good people. So yeah, I had a great time. I'll definitely go to South Africa again. I don't currently have something planned or booked for it, but I'll definitely be back there again.
Oh, we could always arrange something. I mean, there are lots of people here who I think like to hear from you, and
yeah, I'd be
maybe throw in a bit of music as well. So, okay, you interviewed Elon, and I see that Tucker is making the news this week. Tucker Carlson, he went on Joe Rogan's podcast. You've been with both of them, Tucker and Rogan, and there's all this hysteria now about how he has become a massive conspiracy theorist. Nothing that Tucker says should be taken seriously anymore. He's gone too far. You know, there's always someone who screams, well, we didn't mind him when he said this, but as soon as he said that, he's beyond the pale. How do you feel about it when you've actually sat in a room with these guys? You get a feel for them, right? And you know whether you're dealing with someone who's an honest broker or whether they're a crooked person. You get an idea of whether or not they are the sort of people who are there to put on a show, but they don't really have any convictions or beliefs or values of their own. I think it's probably unfair for people who've never met them, and even for people who have and have spent a little bit of time with them, to dismiss someone entirely. And especially when, you know, on the basis of one interview, and if you did listen to all of it, I haven't yet listened to all of it. I've heard little clips. It doesn't seem to me like Tucker's going out of his way to be controversial.
No, they're both real guys, man. I've met both of them on multiple occasions, both Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson, and they're solid guys. I like them both personally and professionally. I think they've both done and are doing things that are inspirational and aspirational. And, you know, it's interesting, Gareth. I was thinking earlier today, about how our societies are obsessed with tearing down decent men. It's almost like we're living in this age where we're not really like supposed to have I don't know, male role models, or you can't be it's like you can't be a male public figure in particular. I'm not saying females don't deal with any criticism, but I've noticed
Sure.
it's like you can't be a male public figure and not have the machine this machine try to break you down and destroy you. I mean, think of like every prominent guy out there, whether they could be a podcaster, they could be a comedian, they could be a sportsman, they could be a musician. At some point, this machine is gonna come for them. They're gonna try to stick some type of label on them, whether that's a racist or a white supremacist or a Nazi or a conspiracy theorist or a criminal or something. And I've just noticed this pattern. It's like almost seems to be some type of rite of passage. And
but you better watch out. Like, you're starting to sound like there's a conspiracy or something going on. Look, I hear you and I agree with you.
Oh, yeah.
But first of all, I don't suppose that this suspicion just comes from nowhere, and I don't think that you're unintelligent enough to just be pulling this out of your backside. I think a lot of people have seen and felt the same stuff in popular culture at the moment. You can go through a litany of names, and everyone will know who they are and how they've fallen. But why do you think it is? And surely, I mean, it can't just be like a small group of feminists or a bunch of angry like wokeists. And like I'm really perplexed at, are these guys all so flawed that they just all don't live up to any expectations for us, and they're bound to be found out because man is flawed, as you said earlier?
Yeah.
Or are there deliberate attempts to pull these people down by people who have nefarious purposes?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it's also just that people's expectations are unrealistic. I mean, there's no perfect human being. So if you put somebody on a pedestal, it could be you, it could be me, it could be Joe Rogan, it could be Tucker Carlson, it could be anyone. If you put someone on a massive, massive pedestal and you almost worship them and deify them, all you're doing is guaranteeing that at some point they're going to massively disappoint you. I'm not a perfect man, right? I'm sure there are many people out there. There are millions of people out there who know who I am, and they follow me, and they've seen my content and they listen to some of my stuff and so on. And I sometimes get worried when people put me on too high a pedestal, because I'm like, all I'm going to do is disappoint you at some point. Especially if the bar for disappointment is disagreement, right? If it's like, oh, you agree with 95% of the things that I say, and then one day on a podcast or on Twitter, I say a thing that you disagree with, and now all of a sudden it's, oh my gosh, I'm so disappointed in you. I'm so upset. I used to respect you and so on. I'm like, well,
yeah, now you're nobody.
Well, firstly, did you really respect me if disagreeing with me on one thing, sometimes something very minor, is enough for you to lose all respect for me? I can't think of anybody in this world whom I respect. Well, firstly, I can't think of anybody I respect who I agree with on everything, but I certainly can't think of anybody I respect who a point of disagreement would cause me to lose all respect for them. I mean, if that's the case, how much could I have respected them? I mean, unless they do, they go and molest a child, or they murder someone, or they do something like truly, truly shocking and heinous. I mean, a difference of opinion, that's silly. So I think, I think that's what happens a lot. But again, I think it's important to frame this properly, and I think it's important to remember that both of those guys that you're using as examples, Joe Rogan and Tucker, or you could throw in an Elon Musk in there, they are far more liked than they are disliked. It's the 10 to 1. It's the 100 to 1. Even a lot of people who disagree. In fact, almost everybody I know who is a fan of Joe Rogan or Tucker Carlson will acknowledge that they don't agree with them on everything. In fact, sometimes that's part of why you like them. Like, why would I even listen to somebody if they're just right? They have the exact same worldview and experiences.
No, I
And
mean, the most
it
interesting
makes sense.
conversations you're going to have are going to be with people who disagree with you, which is why, I mean, we got to throw some red meat to the crowd that loves you and loves me, because I know that you've also spoken out against a bunch of really controversial things. You've got lots to
Oh,
say
yeah.
about immigration. You've got lots to say about race, lots to say about sex, about transgender stuff, politics in the UK, the US. What is firing you up at the moment? What are you most excited by?
I'm excited about my life, man. I'm
No,
excited about my life.
don't dodge it.
Uh,
People want some red meat. I said red meat, and I didn't say like
yeah.
salad.
You know what I'm doing in 2024 is I'm practicing what I call tactical aloofness. I've coined this
Oh,
term.
yeah.
I don't know if anyone's used it before, but I'm very intentionally keeping a distance from some of the political and socio-cultural war stuff. I'm observing and dropping the occasional comment, but especially with the U.S. election year and all this, it just gets so tribal
Exhausting.
and toxic and angry and exhausting. And look, I'm not even American. I don't live in the USA. I can't vote in the elections even if I wanted to. So yeah, I could spend 3 hours every day, checking the 2024 polls and what's happening with the GOP and with the Democrats and the left and the right and whatever. Or I could work on my book and I could enjoy my life and I could go for a walk and I could give some inspiring words to my audience and I can promote my book and I could encourage people to get in better health and I can talk to fine people such as yourself. I think this is all a much better use of my time and talents and energy. If I have something I need to say or I do have a strong feeling about something, then I'll put it out there. If I can offer an alternative perspective that other people aren't thinking about, that's when I like to chime in. If everyone is already saying the things that I may be thinking or I just don't have any strong opinion on, then I
Yeah.
don't comment.
Do
I've had people get
you
go
have
ahead.
like do you have a test group, a few people, maybe even just one or two people who you check things out with before you put them out on the internet? Because we are
No.
living, it's got better, but we are living in an age. You don't do it at all, huh?
No, not at all. Not at all. Me, myself, and I.
Yeah, this is probably why we get along so well. Listen, man, I do love talking to you. I think you are just one of the nicest people, and I don't mean that in some kind of facile way. That you're nice and you're good, and you've got a great brain, and I love hearing how you think and picking apart ideas with you. I would love to spend much more time when you do come to South Africa, and even if we have to invite you out here, I'd love to get into more of it. I encourage everybody who's not following you and who hasn't heard of you until this podcast to start looking at what you're up to on social media. Go and check out your podcast, listen to your music, and see what this man's doing. He's changing the world in big and small ways. It's incredible. Congratulations on everything you've achieved.
Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate that.
It's so good to see you, Zuby. We'll catch up soon, all right?
Nice one, man. Thank you, Gareth.
Thank you.